you all for coming today. I'm Gwyneth Mallon. I'm the director of the NYU Center for the Humanities, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all here this afternoon. I want to thank our staff for their help with this event. That's Caroline Ossie and Denny Valentin. We've been doing this event on writing and publishing every May and December for 2 years now. And it's usually a university press editor, a published author, or two, a writing coach to make up the panel. And really it's about how to help you get started with your summer writing, how to get more words on the page, and how to start a connection with an editor. Really how to stay productive as you start your summer break. We want to leave lots of time for question and answer, and Uli's going to moderate today. But I was just remembering the writing coach had a lot of really good points about setting realistic goals and also making sure that you make a non-negotiable time to write every day. And leaving, breadcrumbs for the next day. So you're not starting from scratch when you come back to your writing the next day. Those are some things that really stayed with me from the last session. Also the idea of writing in 45-minute blocks, 45 minutes on, 15-minute break, and do up to 3 sets of those in a row. So that can really help you generate more fresh words on the page. So Uli's going to moderate today. In the interest of time, I'm going to introduce very briefly just some short bios, and then I'm going to turn the afternoon over to Uli. We're very lucky to have Pamela Newkirk with us. Pamela Newkirk, PhD, is an award-winning journalist and multifaceted scholar whose work addresses the historical exclusion of multidimensional portraits of African descendants in scholarship and in popular culture. Her latest book, Spectacle: The Astonishing Life of Otabenga, from HarperCollins, examines how prevalent and pernicious racial attitudes contributed to the 1906 exhibition of a young Congolese man in the Bronx Zoo, Monkey House. She actually has a copy of that book here. We did show and tell, so we have books to show you, both of Pamela's and also from NYU Press, and we'll circulate those. And Uli's book is here as well. Eric Zinner is the Associate Director and Editor-in-Chief of the New York University Press. He directs and manages the editorial program while also acquiring books in American Studies, Literary and Cultural Studies, Media and Communication, among other areas. And Ulrich Baer is Professor of German and Comparative Literature at NYU. He serves as Vice Provost for Faculty Arts, Humanities, and Diversity in the Provost Office. He's a widely published author, an editor, and a translator. He's an expert on poetry, literary theory, and photography, and he's published extensively on these and other topics. He has a new book out right now. We have a copy of it here. It's called We Are But a Moment. It's his first novel, and I encourage you to take a look at it today. So Uli, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you. So thank you, first of all, for coming today. For some of us, it's the last day of teaching for this spring term at NYU, but not everybody's from NYU, but we appreciate you taking the time, and so I want to just hand it over right away to Pamela and Eric. So we're all going to take a few minutes and say some things, and then we're going to open it up for your questions and comments. We'll try to keep it to questions mostly. Comments you can do afterwards in kind of informal setting, but I think Pamela can start. So as Gwyneth said, we're so happy to have Pamela here. We have her books. I'm going to hand them out. You cannot keep the book, but you can look at it. But we actually wanted to demonstrate really sort of Pamela's here because of sort of her commitment to, really deep scholarship and a form of powerful storytelling that really surfaces issues that people need to engage with. So I think you can just start, and then I'll say something, and then Eric, from the position of the NYU Press as an editor, will say a couple things, and then we'll open it up. Okay. I'm going to hand it to you.
Okay. So thank you. Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be here again. I think it was about a year ago that we did a similar session, and Uli was also on the panel. And since that time, we have since joked that it could have been a lot shorter. We could have just simply stated, sit your butt in a chair and write. Like, it's really not that deep. But that said, some attendees, including Uli, told me how helpful some of my tips were. So I will, again, share with you what helps me stay focused over the summer. So it's important to note that my background is journalism, and we are trained to believe the sky will literally fall if we miss a deadline. So my first words of advice are, make your deadlines. I'm always amused by writers who treat writing like a lark rather than a job. If you're waiting for inspiration, you may not get much writing done. So set regular hours to write. When I'm working on a book, I typically set aside 8 hours a day, 5 days a week to write because it's a job. And the tip that was just shared about the 45 minutes on and the 15 minutes off, I that wouldn't work for me. When I write, I go all in, and when I'm done, I'm done. So I never feel deprived. I maybe write from 9 to 5, and then I go out and play, because the summer you should play, So, but once I set my regular hours, I really, really, really do stick to them. My second tip is to find a place to work free of distractions. And for me, I can't write at home or in my office, as lovely as it is. The phone rings, or I get distracted by a messy desk or a cluttered closet, and I start cleaning. So I joined a membership library on the Upper East Side where there's no talking, no distractions, no phones. And it is there where I typically check in the morning, and sometimes I'm there until they put me out at like 6 o'clock. But that is my go-to place, and it's a real sanctuary for me in New York City. I also highly recommend writing residencies. For my last book, I had a year-long residency fellowship at the Leon Levy Biography Center, which is based at CUNY Grad Center. And I also did a 1-month residency at the Dorimore House in Provence. And I mean, what better place to work than in Provence? But there are dozens of fellowships to apply to. You could just Google them. And I think I will leave it there.
Great, thank you. So Pamela said, I did learn something from Pamela when she said 2 years ago that she takes these 8 hours, 5 days a week, and I thought, I can't write for more than 2 hours at a time. And actually after that, I did once complete actually the manuscript for this book by staying in a hotel room for 6 days. And I wrote from 7 to 1. That was long enough for me. Then I had to go to the beach after that. I happened to be by a beach, but 7 to 1 was so long. I thought I'd written for weeks at that time, but I was able to complete something I already had. But I'll tell you a couple of things, and we're basically just putting out ideas and sort of our own habits. I have a habit of asking every single person I meet who's a writer, how do they write? Literally, what do they write with? What's their computer or their pen? And and when something resonates, I remember and I imitate that. I'm very easy. I imitate anything that would work for me. I'll try it. Most things, not all things. Make time every day. You have time. You have time to write. There's a little book that's called How to Write a Lot that has a tip. If you are somebody who is an instructor in a college or university, you would not cancel your class because you're busy today. You put that in your calendar. It's like, oh, today I can't teach. I'm going to teach next week. But people tend to cancel their writing because they're busy today. That doesn't make any sense. You want to write, so you say Wednesdays 2 to 4 you're writing, then don't just say, oh, I'm busy today, or I have to go call somebody, see somebody. That doesn't work. Secondly, you have this time. If you write short periods, I have a day job, so I have very rarely occasions to have 8 hours, so I write about an hour a day. I try to. I actually write in cafes. I sometimes write at home, and I don't need the kind of place of total quiet, but I cannot write on my computer anymore because I have email on my computer. So I actually write by hand, and I can tell you, it's a long story, kind of an entertaining story. I stole this habit from the guy who writes The Walking Dead on TV. He was at the Tisch commencement. I was sitting in the green room with him, and I interviewed him how he writes. So I write by hand on a legal pad like this, double-spaced. I write very slowly because it has to be legible, which slows down my thinking, and the sentences actually somehow have a rhythm that makes sense, versus on a computer where I keep on typing stuff and more and more and more stuff. I hand this version to a student who I pay, who types it up. The next version I edit by hand and write comments in, which means I don't rewrite whole sections. I just add a sentence or delete a sentence, but it still stays in that format. I don't just push stuff down with a cursor and keep on writing more paragraphs. And this next version gets typed in. That is my first draft. That draft I try to have, and I'm lucky I have 2 friends who read my writing. They are smart enough to read it. I trust them. they usually preface all their comments when saying, this is already getting to be in good shape, which means it's pretty much a disaster, but at least they don't say that right away. But they sort of say, this is interesting, but this whole section over here on this other part doesn't quite fit in, not totally sure you need it right now. So they can give me gentle kind of editorial comments, but I need somebody, because what Pamela said, you're a journalist, do you have deadlines? I was raised as an academic, I didn't have deadlines really, because I worked with editors like Eric who have great tolerance, and maybe, to say, oh, it'll be a couple months late. But my friends are the deadline for me, because I give it to somebody, that means this piece is now out of my mind, it's with so-and-so, and I can work on something else. So I can move forward while someone else is looking at it, because I don't want to edit it while someone else may have comments on it. So I put it out of my head and my desk for somebody to weigh in on it. And they're very small pieces. So I give people maybe 10 double-spaced, 5 pages. Say, what do you think about this part of the argument? Not 80 pages, none of this. I used to have a writing group a long time ago. That doesn't work anymore. Now it's kind of a virtual writing group. But we would give each other no more than 5 pages and 30 minutes of discussion time. I've never been in a writing group where you give somebody 40 pages. That doesn't make sense to me, because I can't read 40 pages for anybody, really. So I turn off my phone. It's really hard to do. All I want to do is look at my phone, basically, when I'm writing, and clean my desk and do all these other things. So I really have to train myself. It's a habit. I have to really put it away and say, okay, for 45 minutes, I won't look at my phone. It is almost impossible, but otherwise I cannot write anymore. And I think email is a pretty big distraction. So I have this kind of rhythm to write. Writing by hand, for me, is now the only way I get anything done. And it's, at the moment, I'm knocking on wood, it's working. I may have to change my habit again. You have people you're talking to. And lastly, when I wrote a long time ago a couple of books, I wrote books on these very long, comparative, complicated studies. I had different stacks of colored paper, and I would write on topic A, and then I would have a thought about topic B, and I couldn't keep it in my head, so I'd write it on the other colored paper, which is a trick I stole from somebody, and I would put it on the blue or the yellow paper, and I would put that away. And it allowed me mentally to say, okay, I don't have to think about this part of the argument right now. I can just put this on paper, which allowed me to put things on paper or on a screen. And as Pamela and I were talking last week, it was like, just sit down and write. It does matter that every day you put something into your computer or your file or on paper, and for me, it's important that it's actually coherent enough that it looks like something. I can't just type lots of notes and it's totally scrambled and have it in a file. It has to have sentences in it. And I know other people work and they jot down all their research. So for me, I have to have something. So I feel every day I want to write a little bit, maybe 2 paragraphs that work. You have 100 days. A lot of people are teaching over the summer, you're doing other work, but there's technically 100 days to write over the summer. If you wrote a page a day, that would be a lot of writing. If you felt a usable page, you would have 100 pages of usable manuscript. That's an enormous amount of writing, if you think about that. So if your goal is so I feel make a modest goal, create deadlines for yourself if you don't have external deadlines, because they may not be there for a big book manuscript, and say, okay, by the end of this week, I'll have half of this section done, but I will not go further than that and read everything on this topic beyond that, but I have to have half the section done. So I need to have 10 pages, and then you need somebody to say, I'm going to give this to that person. And say, on Friday, can I give you that? Because then you sort of have to just outsource your superego in a way and sort of say, okay, there's that person. So there's Kendall or Jamie or whatever, and they're like saying, oh, where's your piece? I thought you were going to be done by Friday. So I feel this is really an important part of writing, actually. I need to, in my head, speak with people. So you're speaking, and so maybe I'll stop right here. And then let Eric weigh in, and then we can just go back and see what other tips or tricks we have. And as I said, use the things, you'll know what you're ready for. If you think, oh, this makes sense to me, fine. If you think I will never in my life write by hand, I can't read my own writing, don't do it. But there may be some parts you can pick up today and say, this is working for me. Yeah.
Okay, so I do find that for me, most of the important questions come out afterwards in the Q&A. But I'll say a few things, particularly since we're talking about the summer. And every summer this thing happens I forget about, which is my inbox goes quiet right about today. It's an amazing, I forget about it every year, and then suddenly it's like, where'd everybody go? academic, we are tied to obviously the academic year, to the scholarly life cycle, except we're not exactly of it. We continue to work over the summer. Scholars obviously continue to work, but they don't teach anymore for the most part. And their work is research and writing. But that silence tells me something. A couple things. One is that it's actually a great time. One of the questions Uli asked me is, what's a good time to get in touch with an editor? The summer is a good time. Things are quite sane for us. It's the quietest part of our year. There's this sort of frenzy over after the times when scholars do their work. So after the return from summer vacation, things go nuts. Late August, early September, my inbox is crazy. After winter break, when everybody's coming back, again, my inbox goes nuts. So those times before then, when people are having quieter time to themselves doing research and writing, it's actually a nice time for editors in that we're able to do some thinking on our own and some catching up and some thinking about what's happening in the field and revisiting some projects we've put to the side. Again, a fine time to reach out to them directly in email. Come June, July, it's blissfully quiet in my neck of the woods because our hope is that all of you are out there doing your work. I also say that both selfishly for us, but also I've never seen that it doesn't help a writer is the construction of a proposal. So I recommend that it's not a cure-all, but I think that the exercise of writing a book proposal, even a sketch, even if it's a one-page proposal, is a great exercise for a writer. Again, at almost any stage of a project, it forces the scholar or the writer to sort of schematize their project, to think about in more abstract terms, a kind of narrative arc, forces them to think very concretely about audience, about who am I writing for, whose work am I in conversation with. Again, really to have the kind of core building blocks of a story. I think when you write a proposal, it's hard to fake it at that point. If you look at it and say, like, this thing I've been really interested in, kind of what Uli was saying, a friend says, well, the section you've been working on doesn't really make sense. Well, you put that in a proposal and you think, like, I really want to do this thing. It doesn't really make sense in this narrative arc. It's really not a part of this. It forces you to take it out or to rethink that section. And then in terms of the publishing process, again, lots of questions that folks ask. I'll mostly lead up to the Q&A, but I'll just say that you should also think about using publishers to help in your writing in the sense of when you talk to us, it can help, and different people at different points in their career will contact us and feel more freedom to contact us at different times. But it can help, in my experience, it can help enormously for a scholar to talk to an editor, to try out a concept, to try out an idea, to say, this is the state at which my manuscript is in. Is it ready? What would you need to see from me? Does this sound ready for you? Does it sound fully cooked? That sort of thing. And now it's a little different. Senior scholars can actually really use the publishing process to help in their writing. For instance, I'll often say to more senior people, if you want to, if you have a proposal in a chapter you want to press forward, even though you don't need a contract, you can use a contract if that helps you, if that helps galvanize you in the writing process. If having a deadline with us, and in fact, some of the people I've now worked with several times will say to me, like, please be on my back. I need you to help me deliver this. I'm working with somebody right now who's like asking me to text her, gave me a date and said, don't let me off the hook. Make me deliver, because as Uli said, I mean, University Press Publishing Scholarship, it's sort of the longue durée, we're all friends. It's not quite like journalism, it's not like trade publishing where you've lots of money resting on, but you can use it.
Lots of money.
Relative to us. Yes, relative to us. And junior scholars as well. When you're late grad students who have a fully formed project, again, we can talk more about this, but still there's a very productive conversation that late grad students and early professors can have with an editor to help bring their project across the finish line.
And just to add to the point about the book proposal and how it really helps you, it's like an outline for your book and it helps you think it through. There's a book that I have found just invaluable. In fact, I wish I could get royalties on this book. I've recommended it so many times. How to Write a Book Proposal by Michael Larson is, I mean, it really helps you synthesize the idea and think about, as you say, audience and like why this book makes sense. And who would you write it for? Who would want it? What else has been written on this? If you're scaffolding, what are you building on? And I just found that extremely useful for, not my first book I did with NYU Press, and I did not know about that book then. And I think it was a little bit more of a struggle for me to think conceptually of the whole book. And thankfully, I had great people there to help, help me shape it. But since getting that book, I really know how to frame a book proposal.
I mean, I'll tell you, my first book I rewrote my dissertation, and it took me a really, really long time. And I rewrote every single word, and it maybe took me 4 years to get it published or something like that. And I just didn't really have anybody to talk me through it. All the people I talked to were super senior colleagues who had written many books and said, okay, great, write a book. And then they discussed the intellectual idea, but the nuts and bolts, no. And I had advisors who said, well, okay, go and write your book and come back when it's completed. That was it. There was no advice in between at all. The deadline is really important. A contract is really important. A contract is not a written book. So there's some part where you're thinking, if I get a contract, it's like you have to have a really good idea. You should have conversations with your editors, and then you have to create a story with this idea and around this idea. The contract will not make that book written necessarily. So I think it's a really good proposal and have thought about this. So I feel these things should go hand in hand and not think, oh, if I had a contract, then I would write my book. I've written books where the entire book completely finished and then handed it to the publisher. And they're like, okay, so where's the book? And I'm like, here it is. They're like, you wrote this on your own without talking to us? And I thought, yeah, wasn't I supposed to present it all done? Because my advisors in grad school were like that. You had to submit everything completed. And that's worked in some cases, but I also learned that the contract will make you do certain things, but not everything. So don't put too much stock in the kind of the mechanical parts, but be aware of them. Another thing I think is important, I vary all my tasks. So while I'm writing, I try to, and it's been really great, I've had colleagues, I've been editing books with them while I'm writing my own book. So when I write in the mornings, in the afternoon, I can't really think, but I can edit and I can pull together sources, so I can sort of do a bibliography. So in the afternoon, when I'm sort of exhausted, I don't do active writing, but I'm working with text. I also think if you're a writer, you should read a lot. And you should not just read directly the research for your field, but you have to have the voice in your head. I mean, when I wrote this novel, I watched a lot of House of Cards, and it shows a bit. It has a voice, and it's like there's a part of it. I read The Handmaid's Tale, it shows a bit too. That's kind of good influence. I'm sure I've watched a lot of crap too that's in that book too. But I actually can't do email in the morning because I have someone else's voice in my head. So you try to sort of be mentally surround yourself and read things that actually sort of give you language because you're trying to produce language. So you vary your tasks. You should maybe think, okay, I'm doing this big project, 100 days. Maybe write a short book review, a very short book review, because it'll get you writing. Maybe you have a book that you really want to deal with in your research, and you can write this book review, and today you can publish it on Goodreads, which are very sophisticated in some instances. You can write a 2-page review. And you're now working through the argument of someone else's book, but you're writing. You're not just taking notes and thinking, oh, this will be my chapter, which I'm writing in November. But you've actually now written a review of a book, and you have a few sentences available that may become useful. So put yourself in the context where you can write almost without noticing you're writing. I keep a journal for myself, which is my own stuff, but it just makes you write more often because I find it hard to think, okay, I'm going to go now and write for X number of hours about this one topic. At the same time, you shouldn't just step away from it and say, I'm going to go back tomorrow. So this varying of tasks, I think, is important. Email is not such a good tool for me to write. I don't consider it writing in the same way, although I'm quite formal in email, but it's not the same. But I think if you do editorial work, if you're working with other people, for me, working with other people is really helpful. If I'm writing with somebody else and there's back and forth and they edit it and I edit it, that really feels much lighter than doing it myself. So.
We have such different styles. No one can even look at mine until it's like I hold it really tight until it's done, and then it goes to an editor. But no one, friends, no one, no one. No. Well, Eric is an editor. So there's more a question for Eric, because I could not even imagine writing a book without a book contract. Like, I would never write a complete book without a contract. I have to know that this book is going somewhere, and that there's a deadline, and there's a place, and it will make it to a bookshelf someday. Do you take a lot of books that are fully written already, and do you prefer having some input in the process before a book is completed?
This is a place in which your training really differentiates you from most of academia. Certainly the humanities and the humanistic social sciences, which are the folks who are predominantly the ones who write books. I'd say most folks are the opposite. They're really, they have a particular project in mind that they're going to write. They need to write it for personal and professional reasons, and and that comes first, and then they'll find a publisher for it. So I do think you're distinct in that way, and so I always prefer hearing about a project earlier rather than later. I mean, revised dissertations, which are not an insignificant part of our publishing program, are different, of course. I mean, by the time I'm speaking to someone, they of course are already well into the project. I'm always careful to not mess too much with what they're already doing, recognizing that the professional demands of a dissertation and the professional demands of a first book are not identical, although they're certainly coming closer and closer together over the years. But yeah, I mean, I love talking projects in early stage. I mean, it is different with certainly a more senior scholar who will sometimes come and say, "Here, I got this idea. Does it sound like something to you? This is what I want to work." And then either formally or informally, we'll sort of agree, yes, this is the thing, let's do it. But not earlier in people's careers, I wouldn't say.
So I wrote this book, and I don't know if I should try to go the editor-publisher, the editor route. I don't know if I should try to go the publisher route or this online. There's so much of the Amazon, whatever, ebooks online. What do you think about online publishing versus trying to meet publishers and get into that, especially when you're basically like me, a nobody, right? As far as but as far as I don't have anything written, I don't have any. I was a history major in school, so I don't have any relevant experience for a publisher to look at.
Nonfiction or
a fiction?
A novel.
Yeah.
Okay, I should preface it by saying I don't know anything about. I know very little about fiction publishing, but
You should try to get something out and published. It is very, very difficult to get a first thing published that's a novel, and everybody will say that, and then you take that in, ignore that, because a lot of things in life are difficult. So I would encourage you to try to think to place something somewhere, and that's a shorter piece that can be part of the novel, can be a story, something, and that can be even online because there's huge communities now and people read a huge amount of stuff, and a lot of publishing houses are looking at indie publishing as sort of source material. For a first novel, it's really hard to get noticed on any level. So the indie platform is great in certain ways, but the burden is entirely on you to promote this book. The publishing house kind of legitimates the publication, and someone looked at it, and it looks different to people who are in this world of books. A lot of people read books and they've never looked at the back spine of. They have no idea what the publishing house is, as long as the book is good. So I would think but then there's another part of me. You want this book to be read. So there's a way that now it's possible to publish high quality fiction and have it edited professionally by real people, and you have to have that done. You cannot print it out, like put it as a PDF online, and then people will read it, which is, I think, part of the objective. And then maybe your second book someone will pick up. So somebody here, one of our colleagues, self-published his first book. It's an amazing book. He won an award, and now he has a major contract for a nonfiction book with one of the major houses in New York. But his first book was self-published, not in a kind of defeatist, I couldn't get it done way, but he wanted it to be out and read, and it got recognition and a prize. So there's a way to do this, and part of it may get it out right now. Yeah.
I'm going to say something very unpopular to an academic audience. I would say, why not try to get a literary agent? And a literary agent can help assess if this is a marketable book. And they then will go and find the publisher for it if they find it's worthy. But like, why not go that route first before you decide to self-publish?
Did think of that, and then I was doing some reading. It was a bit daunting as far as finding. It seems like there's so much that rests on finding the right people, the right agent.
It's the doom and gloom part of the internet.
You're
Don't read too
in
much
New
of
York
that.
City.
Yeah, everybody's here, right?
There are dozens of
No.
agents.
Right.
Yeah.
You just need one who represents you. Yeah, hundreds. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a question in the back.
Thanks for some great advice. And so you talk a lot about finding a rhythm, and when I have that rhythm, it's great. But there are days, sometimes weeks, where you fall out of that rhythm, and it's sometimes hard to get back into it. So I was just wondering if you can speak to times where you've faced certain challenges in your writing when you've kind of lost that rhythm, and how you get back into it. Because I find when I'm in it, and it's great.
But that sounds like you write from a place of inspiration. I write from a place of, this is my job, and I have to get it done.
Right.
So I write whether I'm inspired or not.
Right.
It's like, this is what you do. Sometimes it's good, it comes easy. Sometimes it's hard, and that's why they call it work.
So I had a summer to, I don't know, whenever it was, 3 years ago, I didn't really know what I was working on. I had no project, no inspiration, no rhythm, blah, blah, blah. So I made myself write an essay for somebody. It actually never got published. I think it's a really good essay, but somehow the book project didn't work. I don't really remember what happened. I worked a long time on this thing, but I was writing. And then sort of a couple of months later, in September, I had an idea and I wrote a book, but it was not related to this, but at least I kept writing. So in some ways, I think what Pamela is saying, so maybe you're not inspired, but then keep on writing, and I need to find something then that has some sense, so I wrote an article. The fact that it wasn't published is, so it wasn't published. I mean, I can cry over that now, but maybe it wasn't good enough or whatever happened, but I wrote. And I think I probably worked out a lot of stuff in my head while I was writing it. It took me a lot of research, and I was really trying to work on it. So I feel when you don't have your rhythm, then change your task at hand, but stay on writing.
And you still must have a problem to solve, right? Because writing is solving a problem, right? There's work to do. And sometimes it's, like I said, it's really inspired writing, but you still have to work it out. So you're still putting something on the page to get you closer to the solution, right? So, inspired or not.
Yeah, sure. I highly endorse How to Write a Book Proposal. It's a great book. So 2 quick questions. First quick question, I think. I've never heard of a membership library. I'm glad to hear of it now. Can you tell us a little bit about where one finds these? And beyond that, are there other spaces where one can be private, away from your home, your office?
Well, the one I go to is called the New York Society Library. It's probably like 200 years old. It's on 79th Street and between Park and Madison. And I think it's like $150 a year. And it's a library, so it has stacks, and it has a really great collection, particularly of New York and art and architecture. And anyway, but more importantly for me, it's a beautiful space, and there's a reading room, and there are work rooms, and if you need a private room, you can reserve a private room. They have 4 or 5 of them, and I just heard yesterday they're expanding to another floor. But it's just a little jewel in New York City. I'm sure there are others, but that's the one that there was a time I didn't even want to tell people what it was. I didn't. But then they told me yesterday that the membership is down, and I said, "Oh, I guess I need to tell people."
You know, the public libraries are here. There's WeWork, there's ServCorp, there's companies that rent you office space on an hourly basis in the city. Lots of them, flexible workspaces. They cost money. If you're I don't know if you're in a university. I mean, I wrote one of my books in the Kimmel Center in the summer. I had a really huge room to myself. No one ever came into that room, and I sat there, looked at the skyline, and wrote a book. And it just was in one of the NYU rooms, but people didn't know where I was. That mattered to me. So I had to kind of hide myself from, you know, my community in a way. So, it could be a beautiful space. It's just a space where you think, I'm going here to write.
I need beautiful spaces.
Are there other NYU spaces?
Lots
Oh,
of
I'm
rooms.
sure. I'm sure, especially over the summer.
Over the summer, you
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
Okay.
absolutely, the library. Yeah.
All right. Skip my second.
I just had a question regarding, I know that Uli had mentioned, you know, reading so that you can get into like the language, and I really like that. But I think Pamela's kind of, I'm going to lock myself up and, you know, do it as a job type of approach really resonates with me. So as an early career scholar, you know, PhD student, how do you balance the kind of sometimes overwhelming and seeming like infinite task of looking at the literature or reading what's out there and researching what's out there versus writing your own perspective, what you need to get? Like, what advice would you give as an, you know, to the early kind of career scholars in balancing that kind of mental task?
So do you mean like for your dissertation?
Yeah.
Yeah, because you can't read everything, right? You have to somehow figure out what's important in your field, right? You know, that canon that you're building on. And I mean, you have to at some point be confident that you have enough of that groundwork laid that you can then layer onto. Because, I mean, you could research forever. I mean, for me, that's the hardest part to pull away from. I spent 4 years researching my last book. And if not for a deadline, I would have spent another 4 years, because that could be a lifelong pursuit. But at some point, you just have to know that, you know, this is what I'm building on, and then get to your own work. Yeah, and with that, you need some kind of internal deadline. For you, you do have a clock, right? You have to get it done. So let that work for you.
And you're sort of telling a story and you're asking a question. And part of it, when you're doing your reading, be sure you take notes that are good enough and not just pages and pages that you read all these journal articles, but somehow shape them already and say, okay, I'm looking specifically at a question. Is data reliable in this kind of study or whatever? And this is the 15 articles I read, but you have to summarize them in a way that you can incorporate that into your chapter, and not just, I can read 300 more articles. I'm getting a sense that a lot of people are thinking this is the way to go in this problem. And
that sentence that
Yeah.
kind of synthesizes what your research is,
Right.
so that you make sure that everything is relating to that, because you could kind of go off track and down a rabbit hole, like looking at so many other interesting dimensions of it, where you really want to focus on that one thing.
when it's like a book proposal, the book proposal becomes something you refer back to and say, oh, this is what I wanted to do. Because you're so deep in your research, you kind of lost a little bit of track of your question, and there's so many other pathways. So you're saying, oh, this is actually what is my main guiding question, and I'm sticking with it, and I cannot discover now what happened in this other part of the world the same moment. So because there's an infinite amount of research, so I think to just remind yourself, but you have to then stick with it also. And say, this is the book I'm writing versus I'm writing 2 other books in the meantime, right?
Thank you so much. This is so helpful. I'm going to cram in 2 questions at the same time, so my apologies in advance. Just following Jesse's question about balancing the reading and the writing, so this summer I'm going to try to write my literature review chapter, and I could very easily just review the literature, but I know I have to write it at the same time, and so I'm thinking, do I spend a month and a half just reading, or do I spend 2 months reading, or do you have any thoughts about, to keep yourself writing while you're digesting this information, as opposed to just getting locked down in the
I guess
in the
for
reading?
me, when I'm ready to write is after I feel I have enough research because I don't like the stop and start and the stop and start. I mean, there's one thing to fill in a hole here and there. It's another thing to have to keep going back and forth. So what I do is I do most of my research, if not all, in advance. And then that's how I can lock myself up and write when I'm ready to write. So, you know.
Pamela, when you do your research, do you take extensive notes so you can go back? Because you're going back in 2 months or in 2 years and you read that one book.
Yep.
And you will not totally be able to reconstruct it in your head. So you have to
highlight.
So
and,
your
yeah.
notes have to actually be written in a way that you can, and they should be written in a way that you can make use of them.
And if you have like 20 books that are really important to your work, you lock yourself up with those 20 books, right? But you also have, you know, sections highlighted or, you know, stickies or whatever work so that you know just what to go to. And you don't have to like go through the whole book again. Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could recommend any writing retreats that have fellowships. It's something I've been looking forward to.
I think you just go online. There are so many of them. Like I did 2, but there are like probably hundreds of them. Just Google writing retreats, writing residencies, fellowships, and you'll get a lot. Yeah.
You know, we have different approaches. I've never been to a writing retreat, and I always think it's kind of a great.
I've never done it
and
either.
it sounds.
But now it's like a religion for me. I will do it every time I write a book now.
My caveat is, and I think, well, when am I going to have a week to go do anything? I can't go anywhere. So then I have to find other ways.
Well, you have a small kid.
So, I have kids, yeah.
Yeah,
They don't want to come on a writing retreat.
Mine were already out of college.
Yeah, that's
well, I
different,
had my youngest was in college and my eldest was out of college, and I finally. That's why it took
I'm
me
looking forward.
so long to do it. But once my kids were out of the house, and I had an opportunity to go to a writing, because I used to say that too. Oh, really? Like, oh, how dramatic, but they really are, like, I could not believe how productive it was, because I talk about writing 8 hours a day. When I was in Provence, sometimes I was writing 12 hours. I mean, it was just like pouring out of me, because it was just such a, like your mind is just so freed up, and that's all you have to do. My meals were taken care of. Like I lived in like total splendor. And that's all that was required of me, is that I do my work, and I was inspired. So that's the one time I can say I was writing from a place of inspiration for an entire month. And so that was like quite productive. And then when I did the Leon Levy Biography Center, what was great about that one is once a week, all of the fellows met with the director, and we would share parts of our written work. And he also, like, you know, he had a lot of guidance. He was amazing. Gary Giddens, who's no longer there, but he's a biographer. And so I really do recommend them, because they're nurturing environments, and they're places where you could, you know, you could tap into other people who are in a similar situation, or you could totally unplug and like stay in your own little cocoon. And it just frees you from like the daily grind of like, what am I going to eat? And what am I going to, like, it like, I had never had anything like that. I guess it's the closest thing I could have to having a wife, right? Like the 1950s version.
Yeah, I was going to say, what?
Because all of my needs were met, and all I had to think about was like, what am I going to write today? And that was amazing.
And if you don't have that, but lock yourself in for 2 hours, and say, and you know, we all have kids, so we have little kids. When you have little kids, that 1 hour, you're not going to take a shower. You're not going to read the New York Times. You're not even getting coffee, because it takes too long to go get the coffee. You're going to start writing.
Yeah,
you have 1 hour.
My first book, I wrote it at like between 4 and 7 in the morning.
You learn that, and you have to do that, and sort of say, I have 1 hour. I can now think about that. I may not be able to go and write today, or you just write. And you really have to put everything out of your mind and say, oh my God, and in this 1 hour, what I have to do, when the hour is over, I can't even think about it. Don't think about it. It is an exercise. It's like going to the gym or something, but you're taking a class. So you can't just sit there, look at your phone while you're on the treadmill, but actually you're working out. So don't go and say, I'm going to look at my phone, look at the times, what happened, oh my God, this happened. No, you're writing. So whether it's 1 hour or a week, make that time, and it'll feel different to you afterwards. You thought, oh, I actually wrote for an hour. wow, I could do that. That's kind of an amazing experience, and maybe I can write another hour tomorrow. I think these little parts are actually quite important. So being a literature review, don't just read for 8 weeks and think I didn't write one word. Sort of say, okay, these are summarized a general area in the field.
I so appreciate this. I just wanted to ask about somewhere along the line, someone mentioned about I pass it along to my editor and the role of the editor in writing, and how can I find more about what my relationship should be like if it's working well with the editor.
Do you have an editor?
No,
Oh.
so this is going to be my first summer in my 100 days of trying to. Well, I've worked with editors on short articles, and the other part was, do you find moving through different kinds of writing helps your writing? So, for example, poetry or even letter writing, like you said, that email was disrupting your writing. So, do you use those tools to sort of further your writing? Like, do letters help you think things through and stuff like that?
Well, for me, definitely. I think poetry in particular is really helpful to writing, because writing is rhythm, and it's in your ear. And when you read a lot of poetry, it really helps you develop a sense of your own internal kind of rhythm in your own writing style. But not everyone would agree. Not everyone, even likes poetry. But for me, I think I started writing with a sense of poetry as a kind of inspiration. And I do think all kind of writing, whether it's writing letters, whether it's writing email, maybe not text, but anything that helps you clarify your thoughts in a writing form is going to help with, because it's about thinking through something, right? Yeah.
Yeah. What stage are you at professionally, or what sort of project is this?
So my goal this summer is, in the 100 days, is to write a book proposal, sort of out of my field. My field is medicine, but I'm writing on I'm writing history. So that's different. I've published in collaboration in like medical journal, but never written a book. I have worked in poetry, and so.
Okay, so it's a history of medicine.
Yes.
Okay. Not a dissertation per se.
Not that I know of. Yeah.
Okay.
We can make that happen.
Right. And your question is basically how does engaging an editor, when does that happen, or how do they help you in the writing process? Is that the
writing process?
The writing process. Right. So, I mean, an editor can engage you at all different stages. I actually think, particularly would you be looking at a university press?
I'm sorry?
Would you be looking to publish with a university press?
Yes.
Is it that sort of book? Yeah.
Yes.
Then you may even get an editor, because if you do trade publishing, there's very little editing that goes on anymore.
I see. Okay.
I think they can. I think they can help at several stages in the book. But first of all, in what you're doing, I think to be able to have a conversation as you're writing, or just after you've written a book proposal, with an editor in your field, to bounce that idea off, I think can be hugely helpful. Particularly if you're writing, it sounds like outside the context of a program, outside the context of a group of advisors. I think having that conversation earlier rather than later to say, hey, this is a concept. What do you think? Does this feel like it's speaking to the existing literature? Is it in conversation in a productive way? And just conceptually, is this an idea with legs? If that conversation goes well, and then you can start to establish a relationship with a particular editor, you're then in a great position to be able to then go back to them when you've done what you've mutually decided you're going to do, which is probably write a couple chapters or write the majority of the manuscript, and be able to go back and say, this is what I've got, this is what it's looking like, and what do you think, and be able to get specific feedback at that point. The feedback of a scholarly editor is going to tend to be more structural. It's going to tend to be more around the kind of arc of a narrative, around the construction of an idea and of an argument. There'll be conversations about the nature of the archive you're using, how you're framing your ideas, and how you're framing the narrative. The kind of sentence by sentence stuff sometimes, but it's less common. It's less common that scholarly editors just honestly have the time to do that. And a lot of people, sometimes when people have asked me that, I've often hooked them up with developmental editors that we've worked with to do that sort of work. And that kind of work only makes sense when you're quite a ways along. We can, hook you up with certain people who do that sort of work specifically.
I would jump in here. I mean, it depends where you are, and also depends whether you can pay for it, but there's a huge amount of freelance editors out there. And as Pam said, they're published with commercial presses, university presses, museum catalogs, all sorts of things. And now I actually many times rely on people who help me edit my work before it goes to the editor, because they don't have the time to do all that work. And it's just sort of how I like to have somebody to talk to me while I'm writing, and not talk to me, but I actually like people to line edit, and I know quite well what I'm doing. But I usually think if they have a problem with a sentence, there may be something to work out. But there's a huge amount of people out there who can actually do that. And if it's a shorter project, you can say, there has to be chemistry, they have to get what you're doing, they have to have your style, you have them do a page or two, and if you like what they're doing, it could really be a help before you go to a book editor who gives you a contract, who doesn't have the time, and the project is further along. It's a way of having somebody doing work, which is really hard, and it should be ideally work other people can do, but sometimes there's a huge
But I think we're talking about a lot of different things,
Yes,
because editing, I mean, there's all kind of
copy editing,
editing.
yeah.
So there's the conceptual editing, talking through the idea with an editor, which is what
That's right.
Eric is talking about. And if you're talking about like line editing, I mean, all presses are going to have a copy editor. So there will be that kind of editing.
Hi. Thank you very much for all the advice. It's just a good way to jog the memory. But this question is a little bit more targeted for early career humanists. So my book is pretty. I have the intro. I have a few chapters, and I've been in conversation with different editors at university presses. So my question is just thinking about when exactly would be appropriate to send the book proposal. In addition, is it sort of book proposal, introduction to chapters? Is that enough? Or would they, so it's kind of the question of when exactly I should sort of release all the material. Because I'm at a point where I could finish the full manuscript by the summer, but I don't want to get myself into a corner before that, but then I also don't want to show too little material. So it's kind of that question around the timing of this for earlier career scholars.
Right.
Thank you.
And where are you at professionally? I mean, in terms of sort of timeline, you graduated and now you're...
Yeah, I'm a tenure track here.
Tenure track here.
What year are you in? That's really important.
No, I know. So, I had a job previous, and so I had 2 years out, but I'm starting my tenure clock over, so I'm technically in my first year.
Oh.
So there's no technical rush. I would just personally like to have no questions around my tenure case. So I kind of, if I feel it kind of feels almost ready, I feel like I just need the summer to have it feel ready. Right. So it's more about figuring out that timing. Okay. Well,
so then you're talking about basically 3 years since you've been out, which is which is an ideal timeline. When that's an ideal timeline and the most common timeline for me when I'm seeing books for formal submission and peer review. So it's right about at about that point where now usually at that point I've spoken to someone already. We've been talking since they graduated or when they first started this job, and we've already had a conversation about the nature of the work, although it's certainly not, it's not necessary, but that's often the case. I would say, in general, a great time when you've been able to put your dissertation on the shelf, get enough space so that you can then write a proposal for the book, not a description of the dissertation, but a proposal for that eventual book. That's a great time to engage. At least university press editors. Again, I can't really speak for the trade.
Same. And it would be the same for trade.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you've done that, right? You've already written a book proposal?
have it drafted, and I've been in conversation with a few university presses, so I've been building those relationships.
Yeah.
But it's just more about it. There's no real. All the handbooks just say like send it in eventually, but then it's just hard to get a clear sense of exactly how many chapters I should send out. Should I send out the whole manuscript? Those sort of questions.
Well, for me, what's worked is a book proposal and a chapter, and that's what would go to an editor.
So, and I understood that this was. I was just sort of saying in general for new scholars that what the process would look like. So, and I do think again that point at which you can write up a proper book proposal is a great time to have that initial conversation, which sounds like you've already had with university press editors. And then at the point, usually they will give you direct feedback about what they'd like to see. But for me, if I'm waiting, if what I want is to send the book out for review, personally, what we're looking for a first book is a proposal plus the majority of the manuscript. So if it's
they made an exception for me.
We did.
Some special.
And we did, and there's always exceptions, but that's, the general rule for us is if it's a 5-chapter book, we'll want to see at least 3. 4-chapter book, at least 3 chapters, plus a substantial proposal. And really, again, we're looking for enough for a first book for peer reviewers to get a serious sense of an archive, a narrative arc.
Can you talk a little bit about the review process? And does the contract come after that review process? And how does that work? Who selects the reviewers?
So I almost always ask for ideas from authors. We don't necessarily use them, but they're helpful for me. Sometimes I'll use them. Sometimes it's helpful for me just to give me a clear sense about who the author thinks of as their interlocutors. We usually use 2 reviewers. Sometimes it's 3. They're single blind. We send them out for review. When we get those reviews back, we'll discuss them with the author, assuming they're in the static to constructively critical range. We will ask for a response. We'll take that response to the editorial committee with a whole sort of editorial memo and packet and all sorts of other materials to propose for a contract. The book is accepted. A contract is offered at that point. We and most university presses will then have at least one more round. So when the final manuscript is handed in, it will again go out for peer review. Usually we try for the original reviewers. Sometimes they're not available. Sometimes we'll decide that we would like another person because of a particular area of expertise. Maybe we need somebody who does, say, ethnography, and we want some feedback on that. Usually it's 2 rounds. If there's problems, it can go further, but that's generally the peer review process.
My question has to do with the social etiquette of contacting an editor. So you just select a publishing house that could work for you. You have a first interaction, but you mentioned about exchanging emails with the author. So I'm wondering, what do you guys talk about in those emails, and for how long do they go along before somebody sends you a book proposal or something more concrete? Thank you.
I guess I don't remember the context in which I said exchanging emails, but it's not an elaborate correspondence. It's really the point at which you have enough to have a productive conversation with an editor. Those conversations are probably best had at conferences if you can swing it. Those are the place. That's really the place that we meet authors and have those conversations. So to contact an editor in advance of a meeting that they'll be going to, and saying, here's a paragraph. Here's what I'm working on. Here's who I am. I'd love to meet to discuss this with you. Can you make some time? I mean, that's the best way and the ideal time for that to happen. You can do it, like I said, over the summer. You can always write a letter and again, a brief note to say, or attach a proposal. This is who I am. This is what I'm working on. Would love to, if this interests you, would love to talk more. Doesn't have to be at a conference, but that's the basic initial come on.
Just want to say thank you for your time. I've been out of college for a while, but I don't have any formal background in writing, so I'm just getting started now. I launched a website, so I'm getting started with blogging, and I want to get more into creative nonfiction, writing essays. So my question is really how to get better at storytelling. Do you recommend taking some type of summer writing course, or just reading more books and, again, finding that voice and developing it? So I find that I've written a lot of drafts of different posts or articles I want to write, and I have so much information and research that sometimes I'm just leave it there, and hard to get right back into that rhythm of a specific short piece.
So the question is,
How to
should
get-
you take a course?
Yeah, or reading
Or
more,
should
just
you
getting better at storytelling.
always read a lot
Yeah.
of good writing?
Okay.
And you know, if you were my student, I would say to deconstruct good writing. Usually it has the same skeletal framework. You know, there's usually like some kind of anecdote that draws you in, and then there's a nut graph that tells the reader why this is being written at this moment in time, and then there's all the support that supports that. Anyway, like good writing usually has kind of a similar narrative arc, and the more you read good writing, the better your writing will become. And as far as a course, I mean, I'm all about education. Like taking some kind of writing course never hurts.
Hi. Question about working on biography. And did you find any unique challenges with working on biography as opposed to developing an argument about other people's writing?
So I guess you're asking me. It had so many unique challenges that we could spend another hour just talking about the unique challenges, especially writing about someone who did not have, you know, archives and or a real voice. So that's a whole different can of worms. Yeah, a lot of challenges. But in terms of storytelling, it pretty much follows the same kind of rules. You know, writing is trying to entice your reader, right, and trying to draw them in with compelling examples of what it is you're writing about. So whether it's biography, I only write nonfiction, so all of the stories, you know, have a really human dimension and some kind of dramatic tension. So I didn't find a real difference in terms of how to approach the writing. Yeah.
I just want to thank our panelists. If we could have a round of applause, please.